one.
Hello, welcome to Meet Me at the Movies. Noel T manning the second here. Appreciate you joining us as we talk films in its various forms and fashions. One of the things I've been doing over the past year or so is engaging audience members. Sometimes it's film critics, sometimes it's journalists, sometimes it's just film lovers, and asking the very simple yet complex question, what do you consider practically perfect cinema? Well, today we've got Sean O'Connell from Real Blend to address that very question. So let's dive back into the archives and see what Sean has to say about practically perfect cinema. Hello and welcome to Practically Perfect Cinema. I'm Noel T manning II, and I love talking to filmmakers, to film journalists, to film lovers, and very happy to have an old friend, Sean O'Connell, with us today to talk about a film that he feels is practically perfect. And what I love about this, Sean, is it's such a subjective concept of what we're talking about, and as long as people can defend why, that's all that matters. That's all that matters.
True. Yeah, true. And I'm surprised that I'm the one who gets to talk about this movie, because there's so many people I feel, especially our age, who would consider this to be a perfect movie. If not the very least, it's a screenplay that gets referenced all the time as being airtight for so many different reasons.
Absolutely. But before we dive into that, I would love for you to give our audience a little background on where your love of film came from and maybe how you nurtured it.
Sure. It dates all the way back to when I was a little kid. Basically, grew up living in Blockbuster videos, and even before that, mom and pop video stores that were independent of the bigger chains. And for whatever reason, so I've always been like a storytelling junkie. I voraciously read stories as a kid and was always seeking out new stories and new characters. And through evolving as a person who just absorbed as many stories as possible, film just became one of my favorite ways to take that in. And maybe it was just because of the speediness of a 90-minute or 2-hour film that could process a bunch of different things. But just walking into, and I guess some people feel this in a library as well too, when you walk in and just see that plethora of options, it could be anything. And I really did. I took in every genre possible: horror, westerns, romances. I just wanted it all. And it never struck me until a little bit later that people had favorites, that they sort of focused on one genre in particular that they loved, because I adored all of it, and eventually found my niche, and sort of filtered it in. But I still love to see as much as possible. And then once you start learning more about the filmmaking process and different directors and how you might gravitate towards their style, it's still been a learning process, every single day. And that's what I love about filmmaking as well.
Yeah, and the beauty of what you've been able to do, you've been able to parlay that love of it into the aspect of being able to engage with those who are making that magic happen every day. And you pretty much, if you want to know where Sean O'Connell is going to be tomorrow, he doesn't even know sometimes, because it's like, hey, you want to come to London? Well, sure, absolutely. So that's been kind of a unexpected part of this journey for you. Would that be a fair assessment?
Oh, sure. If you had asked me, when this started, if I could have dreamt that I'd be able to do half the things I've been able to do, I would have laughed in your face. Because legitimately, I was a communications minor in college, essentially, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I knew I wanted to do something in, television or radio or something along those lines. And it was only when a friend of mine, off the cuff, happened to say one time, like, because we would talk about movies, on our lunch break all the time, and he goes, "Boy, you should do this for a living." And like that light bulb, the proverbial light bulb, went off.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, other people do that. It is a career path. And so I just, persistently pushed down that route. But, I kind of thought that I would review movies or, find different ways to be able to talk about film. And at that time, the internet was just starting to come up. And so, sites needed content. But as that has progressed, and it's been the opportunity to go visit these sets, and it's been the opportunities to speak to and do interviews with the people who I, adore and respect, who make these films, I've fallen backwards, into an amazing career, and I'm thankful every single day that I get a chance to do it.
Yeah, I know that there are days that you still kind of pinch yourself and going, "Is this really happening? Is this really happening?"
Sure, but it stems back to living in the world of cinema from that earliest age, because I didn't think about it at the time, but what I was doing was, putting together a knowledge base, to be able to talk intelligently about old films and make parallels to things that have happened, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and
Yeah.
not to a boring extent, not to be like, oh, well, back in the day they did that, like to notice when a director is going after, and to use someone like Rian Johnson, who's, we just saw each other at Glass Onion, when he makes parallels to like Sleuth or one of the early Agatha Christie adaptations, he's doing it for fun. It's a nod, he loves it, and he wants other people to love it as well too. And so if you can enjoy something like Knives Out and Glass Onion, and then it opens you up to go watch, Murder on the Orient Express, then everybody wins.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks for spending time with us talking Practically Perfect Cinema, and your choice goes back to 1985, and what I love about this time period for me personally, you talk about kind of the history of things you kind of grew up with. At that time, I was working at Camelot Music and the Movies. It used to be just a music store, but then once they started realizing, hey, we can turn part of our store into a video store, we can compete with the Blockbusters and the movies that are out there. It was just this film was perfect for me at that time, because it both had an impact on the music we were selling, but also ultimately an impact on the videos that we were going to be renting as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah, sure, of course. Power of Love. Huey Lewis and the News.
Yes. Yeah. So the movie is Back to the Future, and I've got. I mean, you can't find. It's everywhere. I mean, I've got all these magazines. I've got this book, 101 movies to see before you grow up, and you got Marty McFly right there. And of course, you can't say movies of the '80s without having Back to the Future somewhere as well in that conversation. But this one is Practically Perfect Cinema. So I want you to tell me why this one for you is a practically perfect film.
Well, even if you just take it as the first one movie and you don't think about the fact that it's set up a trilogy, if you just consider it, from start to finish, it's a beautifully contained script that dabbles in something that so many other filmmakers try to get and get confused in trying to pull it off, which is time travel.
Yeah.
I love a good time travel movie. Quite often they take you out of it because you're nitpicking the science, But this one, it uses the time travel as a device, but it's not the main point of the story. Of course, it's still a very human story, and it's very, what if this kid got to go back and meet his parents when they were his age, sort of thing. And that hook is fantastic. But when you channel the science, and when you channel the time travel through someone like Dr. Emmett Brown, who is just so beautifully portrayed by Christopher Lloyd,
Oh yeah.
It helps. You dial in because you care so much about these characters. And it's miraculous, too, in the fact that the movies that work the best have some sort of accident to them. Like, Michael J. Fox wasn't supposed to be in this movie. It was supposed to be Eric Stoltz. They shot a couple of days with him and then finally replaced him. When you think about how Michael J. Fox was juggling Family Ties and Back to the Future at the same time, and legitimately exhausting himself, which then plays into a lot of the energy that Marty has in the movie. Like, Marty's moving it nonstop in this film, like he's constantly trying to stay ahead of the clock, no pun intended. And one of the things that's so beautiful about this script is that of all the moments, and there's so many memorable moments that people can point back to, and forget about the rest of the cast that we haven't even mentioned, but I'm sure we'll get into at some point with Crispin Glover and Leah Thompson and people like that. But I could watch that final sequence of when Marty has to hit the clock tower at the exact moment that the lightning strikes, and Noel, to this day, whenever I watch it, I'm convinced he's not going to make it.
I know.
It's edited so beautifully, and it's constructed so beautifully with the exact amount of tension that I still believe every single time they're not going to pull it off. It's great.
I know. Yeah, and Silvestri's Alan Silvestri's score during that particular scene, if he did nothing else in the movie, at that particular scene, it is just perfectly supportive of what is going on, and it adds to that tension.
Absolutely. With everything, they're confidently able to layer Doc with the plug getting unplugged, and is he going to be able to get down from the clock tower forward in time? But when you talk about practically perfect cinema, that gets teased in the beginning, like the lady handing him the flyer and Jennifer writing her number on the back of the flyer, which gives him a reason for having it. Right. All of these little things that need to snap into play that a bad movie would force. Back to the Future comes up with legitimate reasons why all of these things have to happen. And they are built onto the story of he has to get his parents back together or else he won't exist, right? You could make a movie completely just on that. Marty goes back in time, he disrupts their first meeting, and now he's got to get them back together. But when you layer all those other time travel elements on top of it, and him having to get back to his own time in a DeLorean, of course, and then you weave in all the things that you learned over the course of the movie, that you didn't even think were important. You just absorbed them, sort of thing. Right down to the plutonium, like when Doc is explaining the plutonium, in the moment it's just, oh, this is background noise. Why do we need to know how the time machine works? But then later, when he's told that like the only thing that could generate the plutonium is a bolt of lightning, essentially, it all weaves together so beautifully, and it's not. Some movies will keep you hanging until the final, like a Kaiser Soze, until the Kaiser Soze moment hits, and then you go, oh, I watched this movie completely differently. Everything is different. Back to the Future has 10 of those moments throughout it, where you're like, oh, that's why they told us that earlier. And it's breathtaking.
Yeah, and that goes to the writing, to that foundation for how it unfolds. And you could have a great script, but it sometimes doesn't get executed well on film. But this one does it, and it does it by utilizing those moments that were there, those nuggets that were there that were so important.
Yes, absolutely. And that goes to... again, Bob Gale, who came up with the idea, and came up with Robert Zemeckis, who is obviously such an incredibly gifted storyteller, and him being able to bounce his ideas off of Steven Spielberg. And I think that, truthfully, there's a love of that time frame. There's like, I think when Marty goes back to Hill Valley in the 1950s, it's one of my favorite stretches of a film, because I kind of just love the 50s. I love when the car pulls into the gas station and everybody comes out, all the attendants come out to sort of take care of your car. You think, wow, that's amazing. And then he goes into the diner and he's wearing a vest that is very common, for fashion in the 80s. And they assume that he fell off of a ship, because he looks like he's from the Navy. And then even just the way that they're able to weave like social commentary in, because he knows that the guy who's cleaning up the diner is going to go on to become the mayor.
Right.
But when he says it out loud in the 1950s, people can't, comprehend the fact that a black man might become mayor in the future someday. And it's not heavy-handed, it's not done over the top. It's just commentary that's put in there, and you're like, wow, look how far we've come, sort of thing. But then in that scene alone, in the diner scene alone, when Marty sits down next to his father, and the two of them, have the same sort of physical, and you think about like, God, genetics, and how much we take from our parents. And ways that they have, made us, and the ways that we can essentially change them, because it pays off later on that interacting with Marty turns George into a best-selling author. That sort of give and take, I think, is really beautiful and gets overlooked in the analysis of Back to the Future.
Yeah, it is a film that had every reason to fail. You mentioned, with Eric Stoltz being cast, and they shot, and then they decided to reshoot. Sometimes when that happens, success does not follow. What do you think is the secret to this film not following that path? Because so many times you have issues that follow that, and it's hard for the film to be able to catch back up.
I give them so much credit for realizing that there was an issue, and not just plowing forward. Some producers or some creative teams might just assume that the rest of it's going to work so well, so we don't necessarily need this character, although Marty's a main character,
Right.
to hit the way that he hits. Um, but to reverse course, after starting to film, is a really bold choice, and had to be expensive. And we're at a time where, of course, budgets matter, but it's not the way that they're scrutinized, to this day. And to figure out that the chemistry between Marty and Doc is so significant to the film,
Yeah.
we have to get the actors that work. And Noel, to the point that, like, 40 years later, we're still, you see the two of them together, and they are who they are. And if Universal doesn't allow them to start over, essentially, and to reshoot with him, I don't know if this is a movie that stands the test of time, no pun intended.
Yeah, I agree. And you nailed it with the chemistry. The chemistry between the two of them is so authentic, and it's authentic on camera in the films, but even off camera. When they had when they've had the reunions, recent reunions, you see that they genuinely care for each other, and that is something that sure, a good actors can make that happen, but it's when you see it, you realize this is real. They're both kind of vulnerable in how they feel about each other.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to see. It's actually beautiful to see so many years later that that's still there.
But nobody stops long enough to ask why a high school kid was hanging out with an old scientist. It's an unanswered question that we all just took for granted. We were like, oh yeah, they're best friends. But I would think that's kind of strange.
Well, you talk about the pop culture aspect of this, and it is truly amazing that even though we have kind of gone past the time that was in Back to the Future when they actually went to the future, it is a film that is still kind of timeless, and it spawned sequels, animated series, a musical, of course, product lines. But it's still something that we talk about today. There are lines, quotes from this that we still talk about today, all these decades later, and it's truly amazing to me that we still talk about a film that, in many ways, it was kind of a popcorn flick. It's not your typical artistic award season type film, but it's transcended so many different decades and genres.
Well, because Marty's such a relatable character. When you can come up with a character that almost any generation is able to watch and understand. Here's a kid who hates high school. Here's a kid who he's in trouble with the principal. He just wants to take his girlfriend out to the lake. He's got parents who are, henpecking him, essentially. He's got a nerdy dad. He's got, siblings who don't necessarily understand him, kind of thing. Like, what? Everything about him is relatable on every single level. It's not a prestige picture where you're, going out for awards and you're trying to ask us to relate to, the blind poet, from the 1600s.
Right.
No matter who you are, you can, like, my son, who's 14, Back to the Future is his favorite movie of all time, and he knows nothing about the 80s, and he knows nothing about Huey Lewis and the News, and he doesn't
or the
care
50s.
Exactly. And who can't relate to how funny it would be to be able to go back in time and see your parents when they were in high school, and how horrifying it might be, and how thrilling that must be. So all of it is a relatable story. To say that about a time travel science fiction movie, goes to show that they struck the perfect balance between character and the sci-fi of it all. And other movies go too far in one direction or the other. The sci-fi isn't strong enough. You're not blown away by the whimsy of it all, or it's too sci-fi heavy and you don't really care about the characters who are involved in this really intricate plot. Back to the Future is the perfect 50-50 mix, with some really fun stuff sprinkled in throughout it, and the fact that they built it into a trilogy, which, if we had the time, I would tell you that it's a perfect trilogy, even still too, because the way that two weaves into one is mind-blowing to me. And then the Western is just fun because it's a rollicking sort of example of that genre. But the relatability of it, I think, is what helps that movie to sustain the test of time.
Yeah, and I'll say one thing we did not talk about, which also has to work well, is the production design and the costumes, and of course the hair. When you're talking about going back to a previous time that people who are alive still are very much aware of.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, I know. Like I feel like that movie steps into the 1950s. And it's a time of, California. California's a place that has always fascinated me. But Los Angeles now, is not necessarily the place you want to hang out in. Los Angeles in the 50s feels like it's lifted out of a dream. It's why that movie, Pleasantville, I think is another fun example of something you could take. It looks like one of those sitcom areas that you could just step into and you want to hang out for a little while because it has that probably exaggerated, environment of everything's happy, everything's hunky dory, we're all getting along just fine. And I think Back to the Future sort of dials into that without, peeling. There's other movies that sort of set up that suburbia, but then they dig beneath the surface to show you how dark it might be. Back to the Future is not interested in that. It wants to embrace the idea of the town square, the diner,
Yeah,
the high school dance, all of these places that may be a little bit cliched and are probably artificial on their surface. But when you see them, they're warm and they're inviting and they're places where you want to be.
absolutely. Sean O'Connell with us right here on Practically Perfect Cinema. Any final thoughts you want to make sure you cover as it relates to Back to the Future?
I can't again emphasize how much fun it is that the movie takes enough time to allow Marty to invent rock and roll. uh, and all these little asides that do end up having an impact. Like to go back and show how perfect the screenplay is, it thinks about every beat. How Twin Pines Mall becomes Lone Pine Mall because Marty happens to drive over the tree. Um, Jokes that you just shouldn't see the first time through, or wouldn't matter unless you go back and rewatch. And most movies, 99% of the movies fall apart on a rewatch. Back to the Future is one of the rare films that gets better the more times you rewatch it.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thanks for taking time to talk with us about this practically perfect film. Where can people find your work? What's the best
Cinema,
place?
yeah, Cinema Blend, the website Cinema Blend. I'm on there on a daily basis. I host the or co-host the weekly podcast Real Blend, where we interview directors, and you can find me on social media at Sean_O'Connell.
Thanks again to Sean O'Connell for joining us right here on Meet Me at the Movies, talking about practically perfect cinema. And if you've never seen Back to the Future and you've not been impressed by why Sean feels this is a practically perfect film, then maybe Back to the Future is not your kind of thing. Stick around. After this quick intermission, we're going to come back with more on Meet Me at the Movies. Thomas Manning has an Oscar winner that he's going to be engaging with, and also somebody who's played Aquaman, Hawkman, and Jack Reacher. So stick around.
Won't you come and meet me at the movies? Won't you come and watch a flick?
Hi there, and welcome into Meet Me in the Movies Open Dialogue. This is Thomas Manning. And I have to say, if you ever have the chance to open up your day with a conversation with Hilary Swank and Alan Ritchson, then take the opportunity because you will have a delightful time, as I did speaking with them about their new film, Ordinary Angels, directed by John Gunn, with a screenplay written by Meg Tilly and Kelly Freeman Craig that is inspired by a true story. And here, Hillary and Alan talk about the importance of the bonds to be found within small communities, and also how you can find everyday people who impact your life in very profound ways, which is really the root of this film, Ordinary Angels. So Hillary, of course, a two-time Oscar winner, and Alan, we've seen him recently really burst onto the scene with his series on Prime, Reacher, as he plays the title role of Jack Reacher. So I just really enjoyed this conversation and can't thank Hillary and Alan enough. So thank you, Hillary Swank and Alan Ritchson, for your time as we speak about the film Ordinary Angels. Hope you enjoy. And I'm very excited to be talking about Ordinary Angels. And I think one of the main aspects of this film that's going to resonate with many audience members is the central focus on the power of this small but mighty community. And I know that for each of you individually, you've both spent time in relatively small towns and neighborhoods at various points in your lives. So, for the two of you, what did you most appreciate about the opportunities that this film gave you in that regard to channel a love for the positive aspects of small communities?
Well, you know, I have definitely, and when you say that, I even think of the small town that my dad, my mom, and my family still live in just in Iowa, in southwest Iowa, in a small town called Kellerton and Mount Ayr, like these little towns. And it's true, the community comes together to serve one another in such a beautiful way. And going back there and visiting all of them and how they really like are cheerleaders for you, and they want the best for you, and they want the best for everybody. Yet this is also a reminder that we can do that in bigger ways in other communities. Like, we're in New York City right now, and I find strangely, in such a greatly populated place, people still can come together to help one another. I was here during 9/11, and I saw this community come together just like that small town. So it is a reminder that when we are in need, people do find goodness in their heart to help others. I think we need that more now than ever as well. So it is nice to be a part of a movie that reminds us of that.
I'm going to sound like a fire and brimstone preacher. Anonymity is a tool of the devil. You got to know and be known, you know, and I think a small town really does it for you, you know, it does the heavy lifting for you. We have to, especially in this age of independence, you know, where we're all sort of self-reliant. We really have to do a lot of extra work, you know, to make sure that we know our neighbor and can you know, fill their needs. You know, we can love and serve the way that we're called to. You know, so a small town really does that for you. You know, by everybody knowing each other.
And the term ordinary angels in general is really such a lovely way to describe the people we encounter on a daily basis who make the world go round. And when I hear that term, I think of people like my late grandparents who were just unbelievable in their compassion, but oftentimes in very quiet and simple ways. So when each of you think to the ordinary angels in your own lives, who are those people to you, and in what ways have they shaped you both personally and creatively?
Well, my mom was extraordinary in that she instilled in me a belief in myself like really no other. She said you can do anything in life as long as you work hard enough, and she never raised any doubt that I could achieve anything. And to give a child that gift of belief in themselves, I think is the best gift you can give a child. So that was, I think, an angelic act. And I also had a teacher who had us write a skit and perform it in front of the class, and saw a light come on inside of me, some joy, unbridled joy. And he really encouraged me to audition for the school play and to continue to find ways in which to act as an outlet. And that was such a gift, because here I am living this joy still to this day at 49 years old. So, and my dad was one of my most favorite people in my life, and someone was an angel in being an organ donor and gave their lungs so my dad could live. And there's countless people who are doing this for others and saving lives. So,
what's it like to have so many guardian angels? Jeez Louise.
right?
Well, Alan and Hillary, I can't thank you enough for such wonderful time today, and I appreciate everything you shared, and love to share more conversations in the future. And I'm just big fans of both of you, so I appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much.
All the best to you.
Yep. Thanks.
Again.